Hey everybody, Doc Wallace here. Sorry it's been so long since I posted a video. A lot of reasons for that, but one is that I have been composing a piece for the New York Philharmonic. The concert is at 11 a.m. Saturday, May 31st in Merkin Hall in New York City. My piece is entitled William Blake Rhapsody, and it's all about the struggle to find enduring love, joy, and faith in a world fraught with suffering. And by that I mean both suffering that we bring on ourselves as well as suffering that is imposed upon us by others. The song cycle is driven by William Blake's poetry. The soprano embodies his text, telling his story, conveying his emotions, sharing his worldview. And the musicians are basically these external forces that may be malevolent, may be benevolent, but they're acting on her reality or painting the text. So at times you might have an oboe imitating a crying infant, or a flute chirping like a bird, or the clarinet being sort of a demented klezmer wedding musician. So throughout this piece you have the music representing the soprano's inner reality, our inner reality, and sometimes that is a private paradise, other times it is a personal hell. And central to Blake's text is the question of whether God, or anyone for that matter, actually cares. The concert will be right here in New York City's Merkin Concert Halls, one of the best places in the city to hear singers and chamber music. And this concert will be totally free and unticketed, which means you get to hear the New York Philharmonic musicians in a great hall for free. That doesn't happen more than once or twice a year. This has had about a 14-year gestation process. The original idea came from a friend in my teacher Karen Tuttle's viola studio who wrote me back in 2000 and said, "David, I want you to write me a piece of music inspired by William Blake's poem, Eternity. He who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy, but he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise." So her idea was that she wanted to recite the poem and then rhapsodize on it on her viola. Well, for a couple years I improvised on the piece and I had it in my head, but as sometimes happens, the music took over. The music started to want a singer. Then I started hearing cello, and before you knew it, there was French horn, there were winds, there were more strings, and more poems. So I knew this now needed to be a song cycle with orchestra. Just a couple weeks ago, I thought I was done. You know, I was proofing my parts and turning them in, and I was listening to the first song in my head, and right at the end I heard a single chime hit. And then suddenly I started hearing tubular bells. Rule of thumb: if you start hearing tubular bells, write them into your score. Worry about the budget later. Before I knew it, an entire percussion part emerged as if it had always been there. Bells are a central part of this, with the full rack of chimes, glockenspiel, and Tibetan finger cymbals. They interweave symbolically with the poetry, at times underscoring Blake's indictment of twisted legalistic religiosity, at others suggesting a joyous celebration or offering wordless prayers. And this all comes from the text for the first song of the Rhapsody, The Garden of Love. I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I never had seen. A chapel was built in the midst where I used to play on the green, and the gates of this chapel were shut, and thou shalt not writ over the door. So I turned to the Garden of Love that so many sweet flowers bore, and I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. In that poem, Blake is extending empathy to anyone who has had their joys quenched by mindless religiosity, legalistic approaches to faith, or other forms of external spiritual oppression.
And priests in black gowns were walking their rounds, and binding with briars my joys and desires.
And I promise you that sounds infinitely better with the New York Philharmonic musicians playing the harmonies and the legendary Lucy Shelton singing soprano instead of me. To me, one of the most powerful images in Blake's poetry is Eternity's Sunrise, which represents this place where we transcend all those earthly sorrows and griefs and pains and all the things that we do to cause suffering and to prevent us from experiencing genuine and true love and joy. So I've actually composed a couple of sunrise moments. One is a pre-dawn sort of meditation before the second text. And then we actually get to Eternity's Sunrise, which is a transition between the second and third song. And you actually have an Eternity's Sunrise chord. And you have all this ethereal stuff going on in this wacky percussion instrument called a spring drum. And Danny Druckmann, one of our principal percussionists, is going to have to transfer that and then work on a sizzle cymbal. We get a crash. And then we're into the third text, On Another Sorrow.
Can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see another's grief and not seek for kind relief?
So that final text, the way I said it, is so rhythmic and complex, I can't play it for you on piano. You really just have to come hear the New York Philharmonic play it because they rock. The third poem, On Another Sorrow, is where all the themes come together, both musically and textually. Blake considers the suffering around him, around us, and asks us to consider what our response is or should be. Then Blake begins to look celestially and ask, well, can there be a God? And if so, does that God actually care about all this suffering? And can he who smiles on all hear the wren with sorrows small, hear the small bird's grief and care, hear the woes that infants bear? And if there is a God, and if God does hear all these woes and sorrows but has not ended them, what does that mean? You're welcome to read the program note and the libretto, which I'm leaving in the video description. But I'd really love for you to come to the concert because that's where the ideas are really being worked out musically, and find out where Blake leaves you, where he leaves me. Are we stuck with a world of suffering? Is there compassion? Are we simply left with a lot more questions than we've started out with? It's going to be a great concert. I hope to see you there. Come up and talk to me afterwards. Merkin Hall, West 67th Street, Manhattan, between Broadway and Amsterdam Avenue. One of the best sounding halls in the city. I can't wait. I just picked up the rehearsal score. As you can see, it's a rather large 11 by 17. It is 103 pages and 354 bars. There actually are 355 bars because due to a mistake in an earlier draft of the piece now starts on bar 0, not bar 1. Fortunately, before I printed the parts, I realized that they started at bar 1, and I better put that mistake into the parts too. I particularly enjoy the parts where the orchestra is a malevolent force acting on the soprano.